We are here with Sandra Schnakenburg, and she has written a really powerful book that I have been loving. I can't say that I finished it, and partly I didn't want to finish it because I don't want to reveal the secret, if that's something you don't want to do. But it's this book, The Housekeeper's Secret. And honestly, I'm reading this and it needs to be made into a series, like a Netflix series or something, because there's so much in it, so much that I can relate to. I feel like maybe we're the same generation, and I went through some similar things, and I'm just really, really excited to talk with you.
Welcome to the Bounce Back Generation podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Dillon.
I want to just start by saying that although you call this the Housekeeper's Secret, and it is about Lee's resilience, I really feel like it's also about your resilience.
I get that a lot. And when you write a memoir, a memoir is usually about the author writing a memoir about her life. But the memoir was triggered by Lee's request for me to write her story. So when I investigated her story, then eventually unveiled her truth, which was an incredible shock to our entire family and anybody who knew her, I realized this story is like my unveiling her in our life when she came to our family in 1965, stayed for 30 years, but the everyday life of our family. And she witnessed that. So I was only 3.5. So it's really my whole childhood growing up. You see it as kind of like my story, but you're actually learning about Lee and who she was in our family, which was how we learned the story. We had no idea that her past was fabricated, that her name was not her name, that everything about her wasn't true. We had no idea. She was so authentic and real, and she still is to us today. But when I found out her story, I understood why she did that and why she had to do that. Yeah.
Let's start by sharing a little bit about what she did for your family, because your family was like many families. There was a lot of chaos. I would say there was some abuse. Your dad was a difficult person, to say the least. And so describe what she did for you in terms of building you up and what you saw in her that kind of revealed what resilience is, because she really is a story of resilience.
Absolutely. Yes. So just to give you, the listeners a visual, she came to our 44-acre estate, which was in Barrington, Illinois, but it was way out in the middle of nowhere. It took us about 25 minutes to get to the closest grocery store. She was isolated. We were isolated on this estate. So our family was in a bubble of, this is our normal. We didn't even know it was not normal. This is all we knew. She came into our house as another set of eyes coming from another past. A different past. We didn't know what her past was. We thought it was a tragic, loss of a husband and son, which she told us, and had those pictures on her mirror for 30 years. But she came with her own eyes, and she was a voice of reason. And she started seeing things that were happening between my mom and dad, how dad treated the children, how dad treated my mom. How are these kids going to survive this? How are they going to turn out? So she became our mediator, almost like a counselor for my mom and for us, that this is not healthy. This is not how people treat each other. This is not what you should do. And we started rethinking, like, really? Well, what do we do? And then she would, he would leave the house for work after a big screaming match. And she'd say, everything he said wasn't true. And so she'd try to erase what he did. But he was our, if you will, we were Catholic and went to church, but he was so powerful and wealthy, and he owned this company. He kept getting bigger, and we bowed to him, Well, his word was like everything. He supported us. He's the one who gave us supported the family and all this property and the horses and all these things that we had. So we thought that his word was what was right. She knew how, from the inside out, how to work us every day and say, you guys are worthy. You guys should not take that. You need to tell him and set it straight. It was hard for us.
So Bounce Back Generation, we're a nonprofit that teaches resilience skills. And we talk about 6 main things that people need in order to be resilient. So I'm just going to run them by you really quickly. And maybe you can put them into context for how she was able to help you guys build that. And that what you're talking about right there is that capacity to recognize when something is wrong, which so many of us, it's the fish bowl that we swim in. So we don't know. This is not normal. This is not how you're supposed to feel love or to feel. So the 6 things are safety and protection, having a close one-on-one bonded relationship with another person, being taught positive coping skills, building confidence through understanding what the values are of yourself, knowing your own value, which is what you were just talking about, belonging, having a place to belong, and storytelling. And of course, your book is storytelling, right? And maybe talk a little bit more about how your father, maybe what was he like? Just tell us what he was like.
That's a great general question. Like, what was he like? When he walked in the room, you felt his presence. He was very handsome, very strong and powerful. He had a voice. He was smart and quick-witted. Him and my mom made a great dynamic couple. They were beautiful together because she was very much of a woman, a lady. And he was proud of his family and proud of his accomplishments. But on the inside, his skeletons were, he had a violent father that was, alcoholic and womanizer. It was horrible. And Dad left the home at 16, dropped out of high school and went to work. He said, if I can work my way out of poverty, which they were in poverty growing up, he goes, then I can never have this again. I can have good things in my life. So he met my mom. Together they started the business and they built it all together. And they were a dynamo partner. I was born 10 years into their marriage. So they had already built a significant amount of wealth in those 10 years, which is quick for those days. But he did. He was tenacious about it. He had no fear. He would do things nobody else could do. He would take risks nobody would take, but he did. And he kept getting himself out of the hole and surviving the next, whatever was payment he owed or something. And as time went on, the woman started getting interested in him because he was powerful and handsome, sexy, and he had a perfect life. And then that's when the evil started coming into our family and trying to destroy what we had. And everything kind of unwound from there. I would say that the healthy part of our family was that Lee was in the center of us growing up. And my mom and Lee spent a lot of time trying to keep us from going downhill, just destroying ourselves. We all definitely unwound and had issues, but they significantly, and my Aunt Di, who also lived with us for a long time, was a part of it as well. But they all helped our family, the woman, be strong. But my brother, he was sort of like my dad's responsibility. And at the time my brother came along, it was 3 years after me. My dad was already had another girlfriend, but we didn't know. There was all this fraternizing was going on. And my brother got left out. Like, my mom never took a hold of his upbringing because she felt she didn't know how to raise a son. That was her logic. She didn't have a father and she didn't know about, anything about that. So she kind of left it to Dad. And Dad said, well, I'll take care of the boy. But he was never home. He was always out. So Rob ended up with the most unfortunate situation. But the 5 girls, we've all married and have kids, and we all made a good life. We've all had to do a lot of work to get rid of the verbal abuse. I think I had a lot of the harshest abuse because my upbringing, my timing of it was the time of my mom filed for the final divorce, and all through my high school years they were fighting. So they were using me as the pawn basically in their fight.
Yeah, that being in the middle of a divorce is very painful, and you do get the kid kind of get stuck in the middle. And by the time your parents got divorced, your older siblings, so there was 5 sisters, is that correct? And then 1 brother. Am I getting that right?
including me, 5 sisters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
including you. And when you wanted to go to college, your father said no at first and refused to pay for it, and you kind of were left to your own devices. And but I think what really struck me was the verbal abuse, as you said, just the really terrible things that you would be told about yourself. And your mother, of course, also experienced that. Your siblings experienced it, but it felt like you experienced quite a lot. And then you were in the car accident. So you had this terrible car accident. So talk a little bit about that and your recovery, and what I always kind of think of it like this kind of generation where we were raised with like, oh, just kind of buck up, you got it, just get back up and get going. And not a lot of what I think some of us as parents now do, which is like, oh, we need to get you to a therapist and, physical therapy and neurologist and a counselor.
Yeah.
And you were kind of left to your own devices, with Lee really acting as a physical therapist for you, and an occupational therapist, which would be somebody who helps you to kind of work through the fact that you had a traumatic brain injury and needed to recover from that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And something my parents, that term wasn't even about traumatic brain injury. It's like they send me home from the hospital and said, oh, she's alive. She'll need several surgeries to get her face together and all this, but she's alive, and, just let her heal. Let's not worry about anything else. And so as I was healing, Lee started noticing all these, things. I couldn't balance myself. I couldn't remember anything for a nanosecond. I was completely like not myself. I couldn't even remember anything about my past, any birthdays, any like what my old chores, or any even something short term, like, can you feed the dogs tonight? It'd be like midnight and the dogs would be barking outside, and I'd get Lee would come up and go, did you feed them? Like I said, and I said, I don't think so. I can't remember, it's like literally remember anything. But she was there and she knew exactly what to do. She talked to my mom about it a bit. She said, I think she needs some focus. We really need to do some projects. So she started doing like cleaning chandeliers. It was like the Karate Kid, when you do, right, left, and,
Sauna.
yeah. And it was very focused and disciplined. And if I was not shining the brass faucets sparkling enough, I'd have to redo the whole thing. And she'd go, do it again. Here, we're going to do this again. And I'd be like, this is horrible. I'm done. I looked up to her as a mentor to me since she walked in our door, because I felt her spirit,
It's really interesting to me. The way you tell the story is that she came into the household and it was like an immediate lock.
Yeah.
Like you guys all just completely accepted her, like immediately loved her, immediately wanted her to come back. And at first she didn't. She was kind of keeping you guys a little bit at bay and going home, which ended up being a homeless shelter, is where she was going home back to in Chicago. But every week she would say at first, let me think about it if I'm coming back. Let me think about it if I'm coming back. Yeah. Why did you love her so much when you first met her? What do you think was about her that was so immediately important to your family?
Well, we had a lot of buildup before her, because we had a lot of failed maids that had come, and they'd beat us. They'd put us in our room. They just were mean, or they had kids that were always sick, and they would just leave us flat, even if mom wasn't home. It was just becoming really, and my mom was getting really desperate. She just had her 6th child. My dad was getting very demanding of her time. So you can see the pressure was building. It was like the pressure cooker, right? New baby. All these 5 kids had no guidance. And there was these failed maids. And finally we get this call from the maid agency that this is really sweet, wonderful lady who wants to be a part of a family and help raise them. She lost her family. Her husband and child were in a tragic car accident. They were killed instantly. She's been hospitalized, but now she's fine. You just can't ask her about them ever. And she will come, and she just wants to be loved and give love. And she just wants to help your family in any way possible. So she came as like really quiet, really humble. And we were praying before she came to hope that she would want to stay, that she was as sweet as they told us she was, which she was. She was wonderful. And, She brought us candy as we were little kids. We just knew, she knew how to win us over. And she always used to bring us Cracker Jacks, with the little prizes.
Mhm.
But those were like the world to us, right? And yeah, she just showed love in little ways. Well, we had like dad showing us in big ways. Oh, I bought a boat today. We're like, what is that? Like we didn't really appreciate all that stuff that he was doing. But with Lee, it's just like she showed true love with us. But then when she said, she had to go away to her apartment in the city, and my parents were like, why do you have an apartment if you're only there, 2 weekends in a month? And you're paying for an apartment in Chicago. And then as the news was going on, there was more and more, violence in Chicago. Civil rights was going on. There was a lot of danger, taking the train down and wherever her apartment was. So my mom, after many, many months, even years of her saying, well, I'll let you know on Sunday if I'm coming back Monday. That's pretty much how she left it. She left us hanging for 3 years. So finally, my mom called on her application. She called the number and she got the homeless shelter. And then she talked to my dad about it. She goes, you know what? We're really attached to her. She's really a good person. We want her to stay here permanently. And Lee had to think about it because, now that we know what happened to Lee, which you may not know because you haven't finished the book, but when I found out what happened to Lee, I realized why she was so cautious about committing to our property and to our family, because it kind of meant she would be there forever, I mean, where would she go other than that? So she would be isolated on a property. She didn't have a car. She never got a driver's license. She'd never been on a plane. And she would be in our family always, but we gave her a huge space to live in. We gave her space all the time. She just enmeshed with our family like perfectly. All my aunts and uncles, all my cousins, we all loved Lee. And it was a natural fit. Honestly, it was almost a divine appointment that she came. Yeah.
Well, I do know a little bit about her secret. How much do you want to share about what happened to her?
I always tell the audience that I will share this, that she didn't want to be found and she didn't want to be found out. Those are two really important things because she was hiding out. She didn't want anybody to find out where she was. She had a letter at the maid agency that's saying, if anybody comes to find where I'm located, this is private, under lock and key. You're not to give them where I am. She went out of her way to change all her identity and to change her backstory, said nobody would find her. And she didn't want us to find out about her. So she said, don't ask me about my husband and son's death, because then I'll be prying and maybe she'll trip up, or maybe, it kind of got a little suspicious, after like 20 years in of her living with us. And she never even mentioned a birthday, the day they died, a name, for instance. I mean, one day I asked her, is Matoy your husband's name or your name? And she goes, it's my name. And I thought, you didn't take your husband's name? So, I kind of...
Yeah, those times that was very strange for her to not take her
very
husband's
strange.
name.
But turns out, yeah, there was no marriage. It was very interesting because she had a major cover-up. And I think it's sad because she really didn't want... I mean, she got to know us so well, but she really didn't want my mom to know she had lied, because I think that's what was her dying wish, really internally. She didn't tell me that. So obviously I didn't know her story when she died. But the weird thing about it is that I found after 15 years after Lee died, my mom died. And that's when we found Lee's ashes in her closet, which was like the inciting incident to write the story. Like, I promised her I'd write her story. What is her story? I never knew her story other than what she told us, which I couldn't even verify. And so I went after it, and I did eventually uncover the truth. But it was all happened after my mom died. So that to me was an answered prayer for her. She didn't want my mom to know. I believe my mom. Many people ask that question. Are you sure your mom didn't know? They were so close. I said, I know my mom didn't know, because she would have told me. She told me everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They were really close. And as much as I think it seems like she helped you guys, the kids, it seems like she was the lifeline for your mom.
Absolutely.
To get through everything. To be a parent of 6 kids is really hard. And then to have the situation. And, here's the other thing. And I think, we work with folks that are low income, and there's a sense of like, trauma is class, right? That there's a class trauma. And I always tell people, you don't know. You think that somebody has money and that avoids trauma. It does not.
Exactly.
And it certainly doesn't avoid generational trauma. And clearly your mom went through so much and needed Lee as that support and that lifeline.
Yes.
Why do you think Lee didn't feel like she could be straightforward? What do you think was her fear about telling the truth? And my suspicion is that part of it is just about the times, that things are happening. But yeah, give us a sense of why she was so afraid to give up the truth about herself.
Well, one, she would have probably not been hired. If my mom had known on the offset her history, it was so traumatic and so detrimental and a high risk person to have in your home, to be quite honest. She had been through something that it was horrific, and many people don't come out healthy from what she survived. But we can relate it to like Viktor Frankl's book of a Holocaust survivor. We can talk about that because it wasn't the Holocaust, but it was as detrimental as that. Someone who loses everything and suffers deeply and goes through so much with maybe no future in it, maybe just death at the end of it all. But she was able to pull out of that situation she was in for many, many years, not only survive it, but thrive it. She came out and saying, I want to be a healer and helper of other people. I want to be something to give back to people, to help them, to love them. I want to love again. And she wanted to contribute to make the world a better place. Like she literally, I think her giving to our family was part of her healing. And our family was suffering so deep that we didn't even know how much, like at one point in writing, I'm like, we needed her more than she needed us. We were looking like the glass castle family. On the outside, everything was perfect, but on the inside, we were just crushed. But here she comes. Here's the person on the outside, looks like she's lost everything and just coming from nothing. But on the inside, she was wealthy. She had peace and contentment. She had a world of, wisdom and knowledge. And she shared that with our family, which built our strength to go forward. And for my mom to divorce my dad eventually, which was a horrendous divorce that lasted 4 or 5 years of just incredible manipulation and abuse. And even the judges were like, enough already. This is contempt on many levels. But he just kept going. He didn't want to let her leave easy.
Why do you think he held on, and maybe talk about some of the things that he did to try to hold on to the marriage when he was the one who was seeing other women and had another child? And
very controlling person on all of us. Very controlling. He would be angry if he couldn't control us, like if we ended up getting some sort of independence from him. But he wanted control of her. He liked to manipulate. That was part of his food. That's narcissist food for, living. But also, maybe he knew that she could sue him for half of the estate, which she didn't. She ended up walking away with just a pocket change and then made an agreement that when he dies, and that's a whole lawsuit today. That's different because the woman that came into his life was, had different intentions. There's one thing I could say, honestly, is that my dad loved my mom to the very end. And even the woman he married he never felt that way. Like he literally loved my mom. He sent her flowers every birthday, Christmas, anniversary, everything, notes. After the divorce, he kept doing all these things. My mom just let him and just left it, but she was a beautiful woman. I think he realized what he had lost because she was such a lady and such a high esteem, integrity, intelligence. You didn't need to put a diamond necklace on her to make her look special.
The way you describe her is just as, just a classically beautiful person inside
Totally.
and out, and gentle woman. Yeah.
Yes. And that in itself, I realize in life, and your listeners should know this too. It was a deep sense of strength and power that she had as a woman that was humble and submissive to her, abusive husband. I used to think she was weak, and, like she was the weak one of the two because he was such a bully in the china shop, but he was the weak one at the end. He's the one who couldn't face the children. He's the one who couldn't do the right thing in all the ways. But my mom always did the right thing, and she always stood up for true principle and belief in doing the right thing. And she always followed God first. Like God was her foundation. So we learned that in life. All those years growing up, I thought, Mom, I wish you were stronger. I wish you could, thinking to myself, I don't want to be that kind of mom. One day I want to be, more of an equal rights woman, or more of a,
Right.
this and that, because I didn't want to be like manipulated by my husband. And, but yet she was the strong one. And that was a big aha for all of 5 girls in our family. We were all like, Mom was the entire family. She kept us all strong and
She
together.
and Lee together, and were able to, very powerful.
About Lee, it was very powerful because the inner strength of those two women brought my dad down, really.
Well, any advice for someone who's dealing with a narcissist? Because it's a very powerful persona that
Yes.
people have who, narcissists are so, they're able to enthrall us.
Wow. Well, I'm passionate about this cause because it's everywhere today. I don't know if it's because we have more phones, more isolation, but there's a lot of manipulation. And I would say there are fundamental cues that if somebody felt like they were on the verge, or maybe this person could be a narcissist, what we'd look for is, control, threats of if somebody breaks up with them and they threaten suicide, or they threatened to destroy their life or do anything really abruptly. That's very dangerous. That means they have no conscience. And that because they could destroy people. They don't have they're above the law. This is a kind of personality type that's just a dangerous personality type because it has no boundaries. So my advice is, if there are those, cues of control or abuse or possession, it's not love. People confuse love with possession. If some guy wants to possess his wife, or a wife wants to possess her boy toy or whatever she's got going, that is possession, and it's different than love. Love is freedom, expansion. Possession is contraction and minimizing and isolation, and your world becomes smaller, where and when you have a healthy relationship, it expands. Your family expands. I can pick up narcissists out first time I meet them now. I'm proud of myself, but I can't. I have a hard time teaching other people like what to look out for, because that is almost through experience where you get that gut. You have that gut.
You have a radar now for it.
Radar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what do you just steer clear of that person? I mean, I don't know if there was a smart way to deal with a narcissist except to get away from them.
The hardest part is to get away, because they won't let you get away. That's the most difficult thing, is you have to block them. I've been working with a really good counselor. His wife was a narcissist and took him for everything he had. He was a doctor of plastic surgery, and he now quit his whole profession to help people all across the world, helping them how to move out of it, and how to teach them what the signs are. And he has a website called decisionmakingconfidence.com. He's got a great website that warns people of what to look out for narcissism.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, and I think your book reveals this a lot, is that narcissism and a lot of other things that come up are around generational trauma. That, these are things that didn't just come up with your father. He had his own trauma when he was growing up. And what's interesting to me is that your mom, Lee, you had your own traumas. And what is it? And this is kind of the eternal question that I always have, and this is why I do the work that I do with Bounce Back Generation, is that what creates the moment or the ingredients so that your trauma gets turned into, how can I help? Versus what can I take? How can I
Right.
harm someone else? Right?
Yes. Oh, I
Golden
love
question if you can answer it.
that's a beautiful question. One is the desire, to the desire to heal. A lot of people don't want, believe it or not, there are narcissists that want to continue the game and continue to harm intentionally. That's their sole goal in life. They can't unwind that. And as much as we try to help that, we've had people in our life like that. We have it now, but we can only let them choose. But I do think it's a choice. I think this is where Viktor Frankl says you have to have the will to live a better life. You have to have that will and choice to make a change. You realize what I'm living is not healthy, and I'm going to do this instead.
So Viktor Frankl, I mean, just for people who might be listening and don't know about Viktor Frankl, he was a Holocaust survivor who wrote a book, and I'm forgetting the name.
It's called The Meaning of Life. Mm-hmm.
Yes, The Meaning of Life. And what he was able to do while in a concentration camp was to look at the fact that you make meaning out of things. Mm-hmm. You decide how you are going to interpret what is happening to you. Mm-hmm. And he showed how you can make, in that moment, the worst moment you can think of, make a choice to see that as an empowering message to you or example to you, how you don't want things to be, how you can change things for other people, how you can create a different reality. Yes. And what you're saying is that desire to do that is something that maybe is inherent in you as a human, or can we teach it? Is it something that can be like, if you were to sit down with Lee, for example, and say, how would you teach your choice in your life to choose, despite what happened to you, to do good? In the most simple terms, just turn around and turn it into something good. What do you think would be her lesson to us?
Wow. I think she would say, you got to believe in yourself, and you got to believe why you were created, why you were here. And despite your circumstances, you got to believe that you have a purpose that's going to help or do something for this world to make it a better place. Despite everything that you've been through, you have a higher calling on your life. And I think she would say, and I listened to that higher calling, and coming to your family, I made a difference. Each one of you kids would have been different. If I wasn't there, I don't know if she'd take credit, because she never gave herself credit, but I would give her that credit. But she did. She made a huge difference to my mother and her decisions to move forward. And she had a higher calling on her life. That's just a belief and an inner like gut thing. And it's beautiful, actually, because it shows that there's hope for anybody if they just have that belief in themselves to keep going and keep believing positively. Now, sometimes we can beat ourselves up for making mistakes and making wrong choices and all this stuff, but we all do that. That's part of being human. But we can make all those mistakes, but you have to look at every mistake and say, what's the lesson in this? What can I learn from this? And how can I not do that again? I'll take it forward to the next thing. And that's what I think Lee did, is that she learned a lot in her walk, but she shared her wisdom with our family, a wisdom that we didn't have the opportunity to learn. We just became victims of abuse.
Yeah.
We didn't have the strength to fight back. Yeah.
I like that what she's describing is what I call the hero's journey. That if you choose to see yourself as a hero instead of a victim, and I think maybe that's that moment where you make a choice. I'm going to rise above this. I'm going to use this for good. I believe that I can save the world, save people, help, Sandy and her family. And that makes her a hero in her own story. And I think we have to do that in order just to survive this world, because this world will take you down easily. Yeah. And then you kind of said this about your dad, that he was kind of always fighting. There was always something that was out to get him that he had to fight against, I guess maybe I'm putting it the wrong way, but maybe, and that's the genesis of narcissism is everybody's out to get, I'm going to show them and I'm always going to win. I'm always going to win over people. But the other thing about Lee that just really struck me was just her capacity for joy.
Yeah. I couldn't even comprehend how I could ever attain that level of high spirited joy and pure contentment. And she was like the ocean when it's calm. Even how the ocean, well, when it's rough, the waves are on the top, but underneath is calm. She was always underneath, even when the waves are rough.
Tell the story of so she was this big, huge Cubs fan, right? Yeah. So tell the story about. And I don't know anything about baseball or the Cubs, but Ernie Banks?
Ernie Banks, yeah.
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 So she was like his biggest fan. So tell a story about that.
Oh my God. Her whole room, by the way, was plastered with pictures of Ernie Banks, his ball, signature ball, all his, plays for his whole life. She was in love with Ernie Banks. But I was working in a company in LA and my boss asked me to go to a fundraiser that day. So I drove down into the event and went in. I said, well, who's the guest today? Who's the guest speaker? And they said, Ernie Banks. I was like, oh, this is a moment. So I was like, I've got to talk to Ernie. I kept thinking, this is a big deal. Because if I can get Ernie to call Lee, that would be the best thing that ever happened in her life. I mean, this was her love of her life. Like, this is the guy that she would. So anyway, we had the luncheon and he spoke and I went up to him afterwards and he was the nicest man. It was a moment. He's just like, yeah, give me your number. I'll call her. And he rang her and they talked for like a long time. And I got a call from Lee like about 4 days later. And she said, I can die now. She goes, my life has been complete. Ernie Banks called me.
Well, she said that, like, this was the best day of my life, And
it was just amazing because they talked about everything and they connected because she knew all the plays, every game, all his averages, all his details. I didn't tell her I'd met him. I wanted him to call her, and not tell her, like not to expect it. Like she'd be waiting by the phone, right? And never sleep. So I didn't.
I wish that could have been recorded. Like nowadays, that would be all over social media. But I wish it could have been recorded. Like, who is this? Ernie Banks.
It was almost like what are the chances of this moment happening with Ernie Banks, the moment happening with the dog park lady who, unfolded Lee's family, the moments that kind of unfolded that kept led me to unveil the story and to get the story, even meeting the publisher and editor and being able to get to the right people. These were all where when you're in alignment with your, with the story that needs to be in the world, that's been manifested way back when, it just somehow the universe makes it happen. That's how I just look at it.
I mean, I'm somebody who does believe that there's someplace else we go to and that they can communicate to us and say, come on, you made a promise, right? You opened the book with saying that you made a promise to her that you were going to write her story. She needed her story to be told, but she couldn't tell it while she was alive.
That's right. That's exactly right. She couldn't. She didn't want my mom to know either. So she kind of had to wait till we found the ashes after mom died. So that whole thing just worked out perfectly.
Oh, I just got chills. I didn't even think of that. She had to wait. And so it was when you were cleaning out your mother's house after your mother passed away and everything was already out, ready to be taken away. And you guys went back inside, you and your siblings, and found that white box that had the ashes. And that was the big aha moment so it was like very well timed. I totally got chills when you said that. I
also
amazing.
Feel like God sort of filled that 15 years with, I had twins at right after the year after Lee died. I had twins. She said she knew I would have kids. And I was like, really? But so then I spent 15 years raising them. So they were about 15 when I started searching for Lee. And, they thought I was mad. At that point they were like, what's going on? We're just searching for burial spots of people that have been dead for how many years?
Like who? Well, you went to the mental hospital where she. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much there that
I was just going to say that's a chapter that's a movie in itself, just that whole thing, because even though we're not going to give anything away. We're just going to say that she went through a lot mentally, and that alone is the most notorious mental place you could ever, had ever been known in the States at that time, the things that happened. So, yeah.
So let me ask you this. When I first saw her picture, I thought she was African American. Is she?
She's a Creole, which is
Creole.
Creole, which is half African American, half French. She looks more French to us. She's very fair skinned. But her, kids. Well, one kid. Yeah. Anyway, we'll just talk about that later. But or not talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't want to give away the secret, but there's so much there,
that we're not giving away, but it's just little breadcrumbs. But I would say there is, Coin, her ancestor came over from Africa as a slave. So they come from a slave family in the Creole, area of Louisiana, the Cane River. And there is a museum on her whole family down there, which is really cool.
She comes from a very important family.
Very important family. Yeah. You would never know.
Yeah.
Never. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the secrets that we keep.
You asked me about generational bonds too, or generational carrying things forward, generational. I think that's a very interesting question, because I did a lot of work on like cutting cords or like constellation therapy. There's different things. There was generational DNA. They call it DNA.
Epigenetics.
Yes.
Epigenetic.
So I was doing a lot of research on healing that in our family because of my dad, and the things that have happened. And we'll see how that goes, but it's pretty intense. Yeah.
Well, that's why I asked the question, because it's really important that we understand that so epigenetics is the ability for your genes to turn off and on based on trauma. So if you come from a background of trauma, and if you have generational trauma, which for African Americans and for a lot of people, there are systemic traumas that continue on down the line. So it's a relevant part of our story is to talk about our ancestral connections to systemic traumas, to being enslaved, to being taken off your land, to coming here to this country under extreme circumstances like, potato famine and all of that. Those are all important. It's one of the things that we teach. We have a thing called the Blueprint for Resilience. And we talk about all these things that people, you just didn't pop out, Sandy and Jennifer, we are products of these long lines of trauma, but also resilience. And I always tell people, you come from extremely resilient stock. And the reason I know that is that you are alive on this planet because your ancestors lived long enough and survived their fears and survived being challenged and all the terrible things that have happened on this planet. And you're here. So how powerful are we?
Yeah, just the simple idea of that is very powerful.
And so is Lee. Well, I'm excited. I really do hope, and I'm not saying that, I know this is kind of like what a lot of authors, eventually want to make their stories into movies. I truly would love to watch this as a movie or as a series even, because there's so much going on. There's so much we could learn. And I think Lee's story is so powerful, but also so instructive. Like she could teach us how. And I love to read, but I love to watch movies. So I just had this whole kind of movie playing in my head. But also that whole, it's all nostalgic for me, kind of growing up in the 60s and the 70s and, that whole era. And, I think so many people would relate to the way in which you grew up. Everything from the Cracker Jacks to, I can just imagine like, your older siblings are all kind of hippies and smoking weed. And we can all relate.
We had it all. But it's true. It's a sign of the times, but it's a sign of many times. It's a sign of the early, when Lee was growing up, it's a sign of, the mid 40s and 50s, what kind of operations they did there. And then the sign of the 60s and 70s and what we were coming out of. And also like dad was like a baby boom, and what consequences of not paying attention to your children or not treating people right. Like now today it's emotional, parenting. We watch everything, every detail. Oh, maybe they forgot their lunch. We don't want to We don't want them to starve.
And also just the patriarchy, which your dad was clearly part of as well. That in that time, everybody was part of the patriarchy.
Yeah, a bit. Yeah, that's right. We'll see. It's a great message you're giving out, and I really appreciate your show. I think resilience is something that is a gift. If you have that to really use to go forward in anything, because today's world is tough. It's tough to get through some of these challenges we have in our society, and you have to have strength and resilience and patience, and you have to be, your cup has to be full. You have to take care of yourself, like Lee did, to be able to give that strength back to the world.
Setting boundaries and choosing love and relationships and belonging. She did all of those things. She had that close relationship with your mom. She had values. She didn't tell her story though. That's the one thing she did not do of the 6 building blocks we have. And thankfully you were able to tell her story for her.
Thanks for listening. We hope you'll subscribe for weekly podcasts about building personal strength, mental resilience, and emotional balance. You can also find free tools, resources, and quizzes at bbgtv.org. That's bbgtv.org.